Does strong performance even matter after the preseason hype fades, or are prices destined to drop no matter what? Let's dive into the data. Hey Internet card friends, my name is Tyler Nethercott, better known as T-Pott. Welcome back to another data dive powered by Market Movers. Last week we saw some pretty strong evidence in baseball that the hype leading into the season actually outweighs the performance of almost all players during the season. Now we're almost halfway through the NFL season, so I thought we'd run the same analysis on football cards. And you know, we always look at quarterbacks. Quarterbacks are what drive the league. Instead, I want to look at positional players, wide receivers and running backs, and see, can that even be a smart investment strategy? Let's get into the data. Okay, so I'm gonna look at a few things here. I'm gonna look at the players so far this year who have completely flopped, who, if you have these guys on your fantasy football team, you're not happy and you're probably not winning the league. So we'll look at those players and we'll see, you know, what have their prices done? Probably no surprise, they've gone down. We'll look at the players on the other hand whose prices have really gone up, and we'll see what's going on with their prices. Has their performance correlated to a price increase in season? So let's jump right into it. Okay, so what I've done here is I've pulled up a handful of players who were, you know, relatively hyped going into the season, guys who were maybe top 50, top 75 in fantasy football drafts who just haven't lived up to the hype so far. And if we scroll down, you can see that over the last 60 days, which is roughly how far we are into the NFL season, that only Allen Robinson's prices have gone up. And really, that's kind of a misrepresentation because he has so few cards graded selling, and I've got my graded only filter on here, that's not really a fair representation totally of the picture. He's got a couple of sales that happened that went up slightly during the season and haven't sold since then. So if we scroll down, you can see, you know, Odell's flat, and then you start getting to these really big numbers and big decreases. Obviously, McCaffrey, anybody who drafted McCaffrey is frustrated. Anybody who drafted Barkley is frustrated. And if you're holding their cards or you bought their cards going into the season, you're probably even more disappointed. And I just want to scroll down here almost all the way to the bottom. An interesting one to me is Julio Jones. His prices are down 41%. Now, some of this may be because there was some hype after the news that he was going to the Titans. People kind of saw this as like this, you know, hyper super powered offense with him and AJ Brown and Derrick Henry. And in some ways they weren't wrong, but Henry's obviously been the focal point of that prior to his devastating injury recently. So if we compare AJ Brown to Julio Jones, you know that one thing that I really like to do is compare players who are younger, who are unproven, to players who are the exact opposite, who are more proven, or especially to retired players. But in this case, Julio Jones, one of the most established receivers in the league, tons of receiving yards already in his career. He's had a lot of success. And if we look at what these prices have done over time, you know, I kind of like to compare the Topps Chrome refractors to obviously the Optic Hollows and the Prism Silvers. You can see that actually the pop counts are similar here for Julio Jones compared to AJ Brown so far. But the big difference is that Julio Jones had very few cards, you know, when he was a rookie. If you look at his overall rookie market cap of his rookie cards, it's going to be much lower than AJ Brown. So what's happened to their prices? Well, you know, I would say appropriately, Julio Jones' prices were up significantly over AJ Brown's going into the season. But since then, and since he has really struggled in the season, they've come down, and his last sale of his Topps Chrome refractor was right in the same ballpark, slightly more than AJ Brown's Prism Silver. So you got, I guess it's about $100, $150 more, but you see some price fluctuation in there for AJ Brown. And this is kind of like one of the things that makes me scratch my head. It's like Julio Jones is having a down season. I actually said it on a video after the trade happened a few months ago that I expected that Julio Jones wasn't going to have like the super strong season that other people have maybe expected, just because of how many mouths to feed and how much the Titans tend to focus on running the ball. Now, with the injury to Henry, that might all be changing. This is kind of a telling graph, and if we scroll down to their stats, what you'll see is over the last 60 days, you can see that, you know, AJ Brown's Optic Hollow has come down somewhat significantly, but Julio has come down 50% from $1,000 closer to $500 on the same card. So, you know, Julio Jones, obviously a very proven player. AJ Brown, not so much. This seems a little bit overreactive to me, but maybe in contrast, it was an overreaction going into the season on the hype of Julio Jones. So let's jump over and let's look at the players who are actually performing well so far this season. So if you look at this list, these are the guys who are carrying people's fantasy teams so far. These are the heroes of the season who are performing well for their actual teams. And if we scroll down and we look at this performance, obviously no surprise here at number 1, Cooper Kupp. This guy's having, he's on pace to break records this season. He's obviously got the chemistry with Matthew Stafford, and his prices are up significantly. And he also wasn't a guy that a lot of people were looking at going into the season. He's just kind of flown under the radar. He kind of fits into that mold of some of the guys in the past, Julian Edelman, Wes Welker, that get lost in the shuffle in spite of absolutely phenomenal numbers. And if we keep scrolling down, you see Derrick Henry, second on the list. Again, this is a guy who was on pace to break multiple records this season, who had separated himself completely from the pack in terms of rushing yard, and who was being mentioned in the MVP conversation as a running back, when we know that that almost always goes to a quarterback. The injury is really, really devastating. It's a huge bummer. Just as a fan of football, you wanted to see what Derrick Henry was doing every week. So it's going to be really interesting to see what happens to his prices over the next few weeks since he just got injured. Scrolling down again, Deebo Samuel, he's one of the guys that actually kind of got lost in that awesome wide receiver class. People weren't talking about him as much. And it's funny because the 49ers haven't had a ton of success, but Deebo Samuel has, and his card prices are reflecting that. But then as we keep scrolling down, the rest of these guys are almost completely flat, or in some cases down significantly. Look at Mike Evans, DeAndre Hopkins, Tyreek Hill, and Kamara down at the bottom of this list. These guys are actually having really good seasons by all accounts. Now, I would say the Saints they have a better record than I expected, so the team success is there somewhat. Tyreek Hill, maybe it's the Chiefs that they're struggling, but they are 4-4 now, and I do think that they're on the pace to go make the playoffs. And I don't know, DeAndre Hopkins, it's surprising. He's having a pretty good season, a little bit inconsistent. You see that with a lot of wide receivers from week to week. And Mike Evans, the Bucs look good. Evans looks really good. Brady looks phenomenal, as good as ever. That's kind of really confusing to see. So looking at this data, what do you think? To me, this says the hype is outweighing drastically the actual performance. And unless a guy is on pace to a record-breaking season, their card prices look like they're destined to go down. And we've seen some of that in the past, last year too. We saw that with basketball. We saw that with baseball from the video that I showed last week, that with the exception of a few breakout players, the rest of these guys tend to come down drastically. So what if we come over here and we look at price movements, and I filtered on football, and I'm just looking at kind of rookie cards from the last 10 years, graded cards only, what's going on with the market as a whole. And if I scroll down, you'll see some of the same names that I already mentioned, and then you'll see some of the quarterbacks. Kyler's up, Dak's up, and they're up a little bit. Joe Burrow's up a little bit. But I filtered this by 10 results per page. And you can see that I get 13 players whose prices have gone up, anywhere from 2% or more in the last 60 days. And then the remaining 74 players, the 74 key players who have enough sales volume, have all gone down since the season started. So 13 have gone up, 74 have gone down. That's crazy. And that's, I guess, how the market is shifting and evolving now. That's what we're seeing is, people are tending to soften a little bit on ultra modern, on modern cards. They're not as bought into this reactive nature. Oh, a guy had a big game 1 week in football, so we're going to all overreact. Now, we do see that a little bit with guys like Mike White this past weekend, who kind of blew up. But overall, that stuff seems to be stabilizing, and there seems to be a lot less reactive stuff happening. So if we know that's happening with players, what about sealed wax? And you've seen Jeff talk about this recently many times. Obviously, you know that Jeff is big into sealed wax. Let's go and look and see what's happening with these products since 2012. And overall, just looking at this chart, you can see that sealed wax of football, of Prism, has gone up in the same time frame that the majority of these players have gone down. I'm on the last 60 days, and I'll just scroll down and you can see 2016 Prism football up 89% in the last 60 days. 2018 Prism up 41%, 2019 up 40%. And then the rest of these are going to be relatively flat. You see 2015 down, 1%, pretty much flat there. So the message here is sealed wax versus players. You're going to be able to expect much more consistent returns when you buy sealed wax product than when you invest in specific players. And if you invest into specific players, it's usually a much better idea to invest in a diversified mix of players and a diversity of eras so that you're not putting all your eggs into one basket and seeing a player like Julio Jones or somebody else, Christian McCaffrey, lose you a bunch of money. Okay, so what do you think of these results? Is this surprising to you? I have to say I'm a little bit surprised. I knew preseason hype was big, but this is an example of how the market continues to shift and even soften on modern cards. And I have theories around this. We'll save those for another episode. But the lesson here, as Jeff preaches, is definitely buy wax and also consider buying all-time greats, retired GOATs. I've done episodes in the past comparing those players' values to the modern prices. And I gotta say, there's deals to be had in vintage and in stuff from the 90s if you wanna look to the past. All right, as always, let me know your thoughts down in the comments. Make sure to like this video, subscribe, hit the bell icon, and visit marketmoversapp.com for more information about market movers. Until next time, happy investing.